Today's topic is a special request, and it's about how to weave in yarn tails on selvages that are not going to be finished. If I'm not going to be seaming this and I'm not going to be picking up stitches, I want to get rid of these yarn tails in such a way that they're not going to pull free when they're stretched, and they'll be inconspicuous. And notice I've got ribbing and I've got stockinette. Well, let's look over here. The first step is to look at the right side, and this is anytime you're weaving in yarn tails. And if you have an over large stitch where that yarn tail is that you can kind of tighten up those stitches. Now I'm going to weave in these guys, and when you're weaving in and ribbing, you can always weave in using the knit column stitches, and it really works out quite well, and it's invisible and it stretches and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to thread my needle here and we'll weave in a couple. The one thing you don't want to do is just do a running stitch up the selvage if it's not going to be finished. If it's going to be seamed, not a big deal, but if it's not going to be seamed, that just pulls free. You stretch it and it just rips right out. Okay, now I'm going to turn this upside down. And where I'm going to want to go, and I'm not going to be bothered by that, that's a selvage stitch and it's ugly, is I'm going to go over here to this column of knit stitches, and I'm just going to follow those stitches along. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to, when I get to the other side, I want to go up a few stitches. And what that does is it kind of anchors it so that it won't pull free. Now, notice, doesn't really impact the right side of the work at all. I don't see it, and I stretch it, and it's good to go. I'm going to do the same thing with this guy over here. Now, I happen to, on this piece, have a column of knit stitches right next to where, crap, I could use a bigger needle, to where I want to weave in. Notice here's I've got my column of knit stitches, and it's right next to where I want to weave in, so all's well. But I'll show you in a minute what I do on the other side. Well, I'm just going to go up here, and I'm going to follow these knit stitches along. And at this location, this is where, to avoid those bicolored bumps on the other side, I've done a knit row. I'm just going to kind of skip up, kind of go under this guy and go up here. And I intentionally wanted to go into a different color area so that you could see how that looks. That I'm going to do this and it's not going to show on the right side. And I'm going down just to sort of anchor that. And there we go. And notice I'm not seeing my yarn tail at all. I can stretch it and it's good. Well, maybe if I stretch it right there I might see it a bit, but that's pretty damn good. Alright, so I've got the yarn tails on that side. Now over on this side, I'm not going to do the whole thing. What I would want to do is I want to avoid running it in the selvage. So for this yarn tail, I might take it up over here, kind of work it in there, jump from there. And for this guy, do the same thing. I've got to get it over to that column of knit stitches. So you just kind of follow the path of the yarn where it's not going to show too much and get it in there. Now what do I do where I don't have a nice convenient little rib stitch to hide that in, where I've got stockinette? This is where I would use the duplicate stitch method, because you definitely do not want to run it up the selvage. And again, the first step is to look at the front and make sure that I've got any slack pulled out. And I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to run my yellow up here and my green down here. And I'm going to do just half of this, and then I'll go back on that ribbing and maybe do one of those yarn tails so you can see. Suddenly it occurred to me that's not the easiest thing to see. So we got this here, and I'm crossing them. And I'm just going to pick a place to start. And this is as good as any. And I'm actually going into the selvage stitch, which is kind of icky looking. And then I'm just going to do my regular duplicate stitch. And again, I always slightly split the yarn because it keeps it, anchors that, make sure it doesn't go through to the right side. And it's not like you're splitting the stitch while knitting where it is a weak stitch. And so on. Okay, and like any duplicate stitch I've done, doesn't show through. Maybe it does make that selvage a little poofy right there, but that's okay. All right, and I'll have photographs of this in my blog. Now, I've got time. I'm going to go down here and do one of these just to make sure that we can talk about how it's not quite so easy to see when you're doing these to get them over to that first column of rib. It's almost like embroidery. You just kind of have to feel it. There's not a, oh, this is the only spot to do this. I'm just going to kind of go up in here to get over to where I can get to a ridge, and then I'm going to follow my ridges, or not ridges, my column of knit stitches. And there we go.